Port-au-Prince was alive and crowded, a city of fragile concrete homes, until the ground beneath it began to break.
At 4:53 p.m., a magnitude 7.0 earthquake hit. 30 seconds that would erase entire blocks. Walls folded like paper, homes stacked into rubble, and thousands were trapped beneath the city. In the darkness, aftershocks kept coming. No shelter, no certainty, only fear under an open sky. The numbers were unimaginable. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions shattered.
This is the story of a city crushed by magnitude 7.0 and the people who refuse to exchange with it.
In Port-au-Prince, Haiti, life moved in a fragile rhythm. Crowded streets and fragile concrete homes.
People worried about rent, food, and school fees, but few ever thought about seismic faults or building codes.
Inside cramped rooms of unreinforced concrete, families prepared dinner, trusting walls and roofs.
The symbols of the state, palaces, ministries, and offices, stood proud but brittle. In the markets, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, homes and stalls built wall to wall.
Children learned their lessons in classrooms where ceilings hung heavy above them, never tested, never reinforced.
Across the hills, homes climbed over one another on unstable slopes. Every extra floor added without engineering.
Little cracks in old walls were shrugged off as normal, but in truth they were warnings, weak points that a magnitude 7.
Hospitals and clinics were already stretched thin, with too few beds and too few supplies.
As another day slid toward evening, the sky over Port-au-Prince glowed gently.
At 4:53 in the afternoon, time itself seemed ordinary. One more second.
First came a subtle vibration, barely noticed. A strange quiver that made dogs bark and glasses tremble on tables. Within seconds, the vibration exploded into violent shaking. A magnitude 7.0 rupture. Shelves emptied in an instant. Plaster rained from ceilings, and families clung to one another as their homes shuddered like boats in a brutal storm. Concrete walls split open with a dry, violent sound. Power lines snapped, and whole buildings lurched as the magnitude. Many structures did not just crack, they folded, floor upon floor collapsing into each other, turning apartment blocks into crushing slabs of concrete. Office workers were hurled to the ground as floors heaved like waves. Emergency lights flickered and died, and escape routes vanished in collapsing stairwells. Even the National Palace, symbol of Haiti's government, could not resist the force. Its white facade crumpled.
In churches, prayers were interrupted by sheer terror as stained glass exploded and roofs came crashing.
At schools, teachers shielded children and rushed them into open yards, a desperate reminder that in a magnitude 7.0.
Within half a minute, parts of Port-au-Prince disappeared behind clouds of choking dust as entire blocks buckled. Many people could do nothing but drop to their knees, overwhelmed by a violent motion that made the solid earth behave like liquid.
From above, the city blurred into a gray, shifting mass. Blocks of silence where neighborhoods once stood.
Beneath the rubble, thousands of lives were suddenly defined by narrow pockets of air.
When the shaking finally ceased, the first thing that struck many survivors was not noise, but a heavy, unnatural.
Then the sounds rushed back all at once. Alarms, barking dogs, collapsing walls, and voices calling for help.
With no heavy machinery at hand, neighbors became rescuers.
Improvised bucket lines formed in alleyways, one broken brick at a time, a desperate race against suffocation and crushing injuries.
For many, rescue turned quickly into mourning, as a scrap of fabric or a familiar shoe was all that remained to identify a loved one.
Hospitals themselves were damaged, forcing doctors and nurses to move patients out into the streets, turning parking lots into improvised emergency wards. Hospitals themselves were damaged, forcing doctors and nurses to move patients out into the streets, turning parking lots into improvised emergency wards.
As evening approached, fear kept people away from walls and ceilings. Open streets and vacant lots began.
Entire families lay down on concrete or dirt, sharing thin sheets and cardboard.
Children died.
That first night, Port-au-Prince lay mostly in darkness. The familiar glow of streetlights. When aftershocks rippled through the ground, people screamed and prayed. feeling again the helplessness they had suffered only hours before. Parents clutched their children, knowing that even a smaller tremor could still bring down what remained of cracked and weakened buildings.
On the faces of survivors, you could see quiet exhaustion and questions that had no easy answers.
Roads turned into obstacle courses of crushed cars and collapsed walls, slowing or blocking the very ambulances and aid trucks needed most. Even the airport struggled, its damaged infrastructure making it difficult for the stream of incoming rescue teams and supplies to land and unload.
At the harbor, broken docks and damaged cranes made it hard for ships to deliver heavy equipment, delaying the most powerful tools of rescue.
Rescuers from around the world arrived determined to help, but they found themselves fighting not only collapsed buildings, but a shattered infrastructure.
Side by side, local volunteers and international teams listened for faint tapping and muffled cries, each second stretching painfully between hope and despair. Some survivors were pulled out after long, painstaking hours, rescued through narrow tunnels carved by hand through layers of shattered concrete. Elsewhere, lines of improvised stretchers carried those who had not been so lucky. As families grieved in public under canvas and plastic sheeting, surgeons operated with headlamps, turning emergency tents into clinics, fighting infection and blood loss with limited tools. Medications ran short quickly, and people who relied on Dale treatments suddenly found the pharmacies empty, their chronic conditions now life-threatening.
Essential and already scarce before became a daily struggle, with long lines forming wherever a tanker appeared. As days passed, open spaces turned into sprawling camps, where tents made from tarps and sheets.
The camps quickly grew into massive, fragile communities, vulnerable to disease, storms, and the emotional weight of collective trauma. Children processed the disaster through play and drawings, sketching fallen buildings and broken roads instead of the usual trees and houses.
Women organized communal cooking, stretching every grain of rice, every piece of donated food. At night, fear did not vanish. It changed shape, becoming worry about security, illness.
Even weeks later, many buildings remained half-standing, cracked and leaning, constant visual reminders that the danger had not fully passed.
Teams began to classify structures, safe, repairable, or condemned, but many residents had nowhere to go, even if their homes were marked in red.
For some, the red mark on a wall meant not only danger, but the end of generations of investment in a home built piece by piece.
Clearing the rubble was both necessary and painful, as machines pushed aside concrete that still held memories, documents, and personal treasures.
Informal memorials appeared beside ruins, where candles, flowers, and photographs attempted to honor individuals.
Slowly, life forced its way back onto the streets. Small businesses reopened in the shadows.
Temporary schools took shape under tents, giving children a fragile sense of normalcy and giving parents a brief respite from constant worry.
Teachers began to explain what an earthquake was, why magnitude 7.0 had been so destructive, and how to react if the ground ever shook again.
Community leaders discussed not just reconstruction, but how to build safe homes and stronger neighborhoods so the next disaster would not claim so many lives.
In the camps, leaders and families gathered to plan the future, talking about safer homes, stronger neighborhoods.
Some builders began learning and sharing simple reinforcement methods that could greatly improve a buildinger's chances of surviving another quake of similar magnitude. Families rebuilt not just to replace what was lost, but to correct what had made those losses so overwhelming. Young people studied maps and seismic data, determined that their generation would not be as unprepared if the Earth moved again.
Radio programs devoted hours to explaining tectonic plates, building safety and emergency plans, transforming technical knowledge into life-saving information.
In some homes, families practiced drills, where to stand, how to protect their heads, small routines that...
But progress was uneven, and many still lived under cracked roofs, caught between the need to stay close to jobs and the risk of another collapse. Months after the magnitude 7.0 quake, Port-au-Prince was a city in transition, half camp, half construction site, and entirely changed.
Personal grief remained profound, but daily survival did not pause. Families had to continue, carrying memories alongside responsibilities.
Local and international volunteers created spaces where children could play and express feelings, helping to heal invisible wounds left by the disaster.
Gradually, more attention turned to mental health, recognizing that the shaking had stopped long ago.
Survivors wrote down their stories, determined that the horror of those 30 seconds and their aftermath would not be forgotten or reduced to statistics.
Sunrise returned every day, and with it the stubborn resilience of a people who continued to live, love,
Educational programs began to integrate disaster preparedness so that the next generation would understand the science and the stakes of living in a seismic region.
New construction guidelines, even modest ones, held the promise that a future magnitude 7.0 event.
On each anniversary, families and communities gathered to remember the lives lost, grounding their grief in collective remembrance and shared resolve.
Memorials throughout the city became places to say the names behind the numbers.
Years later, the city looks different, but the memory of the magnitude 7.0 quake remains woven into its streets and skylines.
Some cracks were left visible as warnings, quiet reminders that the Earth can betray its apparent solidity without notice.
Workshops on safe construction shared practical technique like proper rebar placement and stronger connections.
Local engineers carried new knowledge into the future, designing structures to bend and sway rather than crack and collapse when the Earth moves again.
In many homes, small emergency kits appeared, modest collections of water, food, and flashlights.
Young students, some too young to remember 2010, now learn about the quake through stories, images.
Teachers emphasize that disasters are not only about the seconds of impact, but about the years of rebuilding, healing, and learning that follow.
Citywide drills turned abstract fear into practiced action, helping people know what to do if a violent tremor comes again.
Experts discussed early warning systems and contingency plans, acknowledging that while an earthquake cannot be stopped, its human cost can be reduced.
Art on the city's walls tells the story not only of destruction, but of solidarity. Neighbors rescuing neighbors.
Parents share their memories with children, explaining what happened and why their new home is built to be stronger than the one that fell.
Many keep small objects recovered from the rubble as personal relics, physical links between the world before and the life after the quake. Youth groups channel their energy into community projects, understanding that resilience also means reducing everyday vulnerabilities in their neighborhoods.
Community leaders repeat a simple message. Haiti cannot change its seismic faults, but it can change how prepared it is to face them.
Some places where buildings once stood are now open spaces, tiny parks that both honor loss.
Elders recount the horror of that day, the dust, the screams, the endless sirens, so that younger generations understand why preparation matters.
Plaques and signs around the city speak of lives lost and lessons learned, insisting that memory itself becomes a safeguard. From above, Port-au-Prince appears once more as a living city, not just a site of tragedy.
The story of Haiti's earthquake is not only about buildings that fell,